All right, guys, so now welcome to chapter 3. So we're going to be moving on from the rules of engagement to the strategy of execution. Now, this chapter is going to cover all the frameworks that's going to guide our hands in the reporting that proves our value. Now, this chapter here was probably the hardest chapter for me to keep memorized because there are a lot of frameworks, and knowing where each framework is used is, well, it's difficult until you have hands on experience with it. So we have four main pillars that we're going to work on today. That, for one, is going to be the frameworks. We're going to look at the industry standards like the PTES, the OSSTMM, NIST, among others. We're going to look at threat modeling. We're going to look at the STRIDE and the DREAD threat model. And then we're going to look at some communication and report building. So we're going to look at how those stakeholders are aligned to handle escalations and, well, the paperwork that goes along with it. So, big question, methodologies and frameworks. Why do we use methodologies? Why don't we just start hacking? Well, the answer is, well, we need repeatability, we need thoroughness, and we defensibility. Now, if you find a hole, I need to be able to find it too. If you get sued, you need to prove that you followed a standard process. And that's where these methodologies and frameworks are going to come in. This is an image to the right of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's one of the things we'll talk a little bit more about, and it's one of the frameworks that you're going to need to understand. Now, smart people have already figured out the best way to do this. Stand on the shoulders of the giants. This is going to help us not reinvent the wheel. It's going to help us ensure that every test is performed with the same exact standard. Whether it's done by a junior or a senior tester, it's going to help us have the quality needed. It's going to be that checklist to reduce the chance of, well, did we miss something? Did we miss any of the critical steps? It's also going to show the client that you're not just guessing. You're following an industry standard, which brings a lot of confidence when you come into their environment testing their infrastructure. All right, so we got the OSSTMM, otherwise known as the Open Source Security Testing Methodology Manual. It's a mouthful. And so the OSSTMM is very unique. It focuses heavily on operational security and specific measurement. It has a whole bunch of stuff here. But the way that I like to remember this one is I have a whole bunch of security devices within my network. How well do they protect me against the current risk landscape? And are there any changes needed to improve upon it? So it's testing our current security infrastructure against the current threats. Okay. Now, there are 5 different channels that we're going to look at here. We're going to be looking at human security. This is social engineering. How well does our company stand up to social engineering? We're going to look at physical security. We're going to look at the locks and access, fences, bollards. We're going to look at everything along physical security. We're going to look at the wireless security. Can I just reach the Wi-Fi from the parking lot and I don't even need to enter your building? Or is the RFID very secure or insecure? Was I able to clone someone's badge from Starbucks? This is things that we're going to be looking at with the OSSTMM model. Then we're going to look in telecommunications. We're going to look at VoIP and our telephone lines. And then lastly, we're going to look at our data network, which is our very traditional hacking stuff, right? This is our network itself, the servers, the workstations, everything. So that's OSSTMM. If you need to have that remembered, remember we're testing our current infrastructure against, well, the current landscape. We may install that firewall 2 years ago. Is it still doing its job? All right, the next one is going to be CREST. CREST is the Council of Registered Ethical Security Testers. Now, technically, this is a UK-based nonprofit, but they are a huge quality assurance and certification body, especially if you want to work internationally. CREST specifically is for the UK or Australia, but a CREST certification is often required in order to work in these other countries. What I do like about CREST, though, is if you do get CREST certified as a cybersecurity analyst, That allows them to understand the caliber of security tests that you are able to provide. All right, so then we've got the PTES, the roadmap. This is the Penetration Testing Execution Standard. It is the practical how to guide for our industry. It's one of those that you have to memorize this life cycle. Pre engagement, the actual sales call, intel gathering. Well, this is like recon, whether or not we use open source intelligence using social media, whatever we're using. We're going to then start threat modeling. This is when we're going to start planning the attack itself based off of our rules of engagement. We'll then look at vulnerability analysis, start scanning their network, identifying weaknesses. And once we've identified the weaknesses, we'll then exploit said weakness. There's technically a post exploitation here, which we like to call the looting phase. And then finally, the report. The report is probably one of the most important things when it comes to the Pentest Plus. So this is just like the standard practice of how we test. How do we do a pen test? Now the NIST SP 800-115, this is the technical guide for information security testing. If you're going to do anything for the U.S. federal government, you're going to be using the NIST standards. It's not just for pen testers, it's also a strategic guide for organizations for building their own assessment programs, some of those internal programs. How do I know that my password policy is set properly? How do I test against it? Well, the NIST 800-115 will help give them the compliance-driven engagement that they need. It'll give them all the steps, the procedures, and how to follow that. Now, if you've ever downloaded the NIST 800-115, you'll know it is a very wordy document, just like anything that the government does, but it is very, very thorough. All right, I mentioned the MITRE ATT&CK framework on the first slide, and here it is again. MITRE ATT&CK is a globally accessible knowledge base for any adversary behaviors. Basically, what are the threats doing in the wild? Do we know? So it's going to help us use three things. We're going to be able to identify different threats themselves, different threat groups like APT29. We're going to then map our exploits to specific technique IDs so that the client understands what we did. Well, we noticed that a lot of ransomware attacks are happening a certain way, so we're going to mimic our exploits to mimic those APT threat actors, so that way we can have a valid test. And it's going to help us defend specific detection rules for attacks when we do actually perform. So this helps the blue team quite a bit for when things do happen. How do they know how to detect it? Well, MITRE ATT&CK gives them everything they need. They just need to follow it. So if you go to attack.mitre.org, you can actually look at this. I do highly recommend that you look through it. Now, the MITRE attacks versus techniques. So we call them TTPs. Okay. You must know the difference between these different terminologies. For instance, tactics. This is the goal. This is what the attacker is trying to do. Example, are they doing initial access? Do they need to do privilege escalation? Are they trying to ransomware you? That is the tactic. Now, the problem is well, how are they doing it? Well, the how is all about technique. Do they start with a phishing or unquoted service path? Like, how did they get into the network to begin with to accomplish their goal? Techniques lead to tactics, okay? For application testing, OWASP is king. So OWASP, the Open Web Application Security Program, I think, sorry, going off the top of my head on that. This is an awareness document. Basically, the OWASP Top 10 is going to tell you the top 10 most critical attacks on the web found in the wild. Now, we're kind of lucky in the year of 2026 here because guess what? We're getting a brand new one. We actually get the new top 10 every 4 years. So if you actually go look the OWASP top 10 up off of Google, you'll be able to see what the new top 10 is. And it's always funny to see that, authentication and SQL injection are always on the list. But it is fun to see every 4 years to see how web applications change and what is actually broken in the wild. Now, the ASVS itself is the Application Security Verification Standard. This is the standard checklist for testing web apps. So if you want to test a web app, you look up the ASVS and then you follow its procedure. This assures that again you're following compliance, quality, and you're doing everything by the book. So this way it keeps you out of jail for one. And then there's also the MASVS, and the M just stands for mobile. So if you're doing anything on iOS or Android apps, normally you'll be using the MASVS because they do have a couple other testing methodologies that they like to do other than just what web apps have. Okay. Now the next one is going to be the Purdue model. And the Purdue model is ICSOT, right? In industry control systems or operational technologies. I put a picture of a plant on this slide just to help you kind of put that in your mind. So when we step into factories or power plants, we use the Purdue model. The Purdue model helps us do that, mainly because it does a few different things. For one, it does segmentation. It divides the network into levels. Level 0 is physical sensors. Level 4 or 5 is enterprise IT. So as you can see here off of this slide, the different levels have different gear inside of it. And because we treat each one of them a little bit differently, we'll treat the sensors differently than we do a server by a lot, right? So as a pen tester, you're usually going to jump the air gap from level 4 down to levels 1 through 3 because we normally don't like to keep some of these systems on the internet, as you can tell, for security reasons. It'd be really bad for a hacker to get into a petrochemical plant and just up the pressure of a petro plant until it just explodes. So it's one of those things that we have to be very, very careful. We have to make sure, are things actually properly air gapped? If they're not air gapped, can I jump the air gap? There are techniques in it to be able to control sensors, sometimes through Wi-Fi or RF radio, or just by listening to EMF frequencies. So there's a lot of different things that we're testing here in the Purdue model. Now, we do need to make sure that we're very strategic when we come to threat modeling. We are predicting the attacker's move before they make them. So we need to cover the 3 main models for threat modeling. And that's going to be Stride, Dread, and Octave. Okay. And let's start thinking about those. Because the mindset here is don't just build the vault. Anticipate how someone will break it. Threat modeling is essentially a structured brainstorming session to find potential vectors. We're looking here is like we're thinking like the attacker, and we're thinking of how do we break into the vault. We're not building the vault. We're thinking of how do we break the vault. So Stride came from Microsoft. It's a Microsoft mnemonic. It's a checklist to systematically categorize threats against them. And again, it is Stride. Okay, spoofing, tampering, reputation, info disclosure, denial of service, and privilege escalation. So the first 3, spoofing, threat to authenticity. This is impersonating a user. Can you spoof an email that looks like it came from their boss? Tampering, threat to integrity. Remember, the CIA triad is going to be part of this all day long. Threat to integrity. Can we modify the data or URL parameters or do man-in-the-middle attacks? Can we just tamper with things? That's always going to hit integrity, right? It could even just be data in transit or data that's at rest. Can we tamper with things without permissions? Threat to non-repudiation. So remember, non-repudiation, one of my favorite words when it comes to Security Plus. Denying any action took place. A hacker deleting logs so you can't prove that they were there. Can you actually mess with the reputation of your data? Then we get with the IDE, which is info disclosure. Info disclosure is threat to confidentiality. Can they expose data that they're not supposed to see? Can they be a threat to availability? Can they do a denial of service attack? That's the D in Stride. Can they make the system unusable? Can they do a SYN flood on it and make it stop responding to legitimate actions? And then lastly, the E is elevation of privilege. And this is the threat of authorization. Remember, part of our AAA. So gaining higher access than you would normally have, like jailbreaking or being a user and then being able to become an admin user. So again, it's a Microsoft mnemonic for Stride. And if you can just remember what the letters stand for, it's pretty easy to remember for the test. Now, dread. I actually like this term dread. So if you look at my little GIF here, you'll notice I'm dreading something. And so dread is to help us find threats. Dread prioritizes them. So damage, how bad can it be? Reproducibility, how easy to repeat. In other words, how easy can we actually attack a system? If it's very easy to do, then that's a very bad thing. How hard is it to hack itself? If it takes a script kiddie versus an advanced persistent threat. Affected users, what is the impact? Does it take the entire system down? Is only one person not able to do their job? Do we even know it happened? And then discoverability, how easy is it to find? How easy would it be for the attacker to stumble across this and attack it? And so this normally comes out with a number of 1 to 10. It's basically a risk scoring system, basically telling us how hard is it to attack. And so if you look at CVSS, CVSS is a dread model because CVSS, as we know, is a 1 through 10 model. And we know that if we get a CVSS of 9.9, this is some of the most critical vulnerabilities that we need to make sure that we fix ASAP. And dread is the way that we like to do it a lot as well. This just helps your managers and other people understand how to do a qualitative model without all of the technical jargon that CVSS provides. All right, let's go a lot less technical now. Let's go with the Octave. Octave is different. It stands for Operational Critical Threat Assessment and Vulnerability Evaluation. I have to read that one because I always forget what it stands for. This is about organizational risk. It involves management, not just IT. It identifies critical assets from a business perspective. Okay? Octave is just saying, hey, if that server goes down, what happens? Do people not get paid? Does the service go down? Do we lose millions of dollars? What happens? So Octave helps us identify that. So this is a great one to put in when you're in a conference room with a bunch of business people to identify how important an asset is to a company. All right. Well, let's get on to communication and collaboration. So I know that was a lot in those slides, but please make sure that you go through them. Maybe go through them a few times. Make yourself some flashcards, whatever. What you need to be able to look at Stride. Tell me what Stride is and what it's used for. Look at Dread. Look at the Purdue model, the OSS TMM, the OWASP. You need to be able to tell me all of them, okay? Because it's very important if you're going to take the Pentest Plus. Now, a Pentest is a partnership, not just a solo mission, right? So we need to focus on stakeholder alignment, escalation, and secure distribution. We need to understand that there's not going to be any surprises for our stakeholders. So, for instance, we need to have regular communication with them. We want to prevent any panic. Stick to a strict schedule. Maybe this is a daily or weekly schedule. And again, remember, we're going to identify this in the SOW. If you are blocked, like we can't continue our work, we do need to report it immediately. And yes, we know the difference between a stakeholder, a business partner, and a stakeholder, someone holding meat. I hope we do, right? Although a lot of us probably want to be the one on the right, but we're talking about the ones on the left. So we do need to have our escalations paths. If we break something at 3 a.m., who do you call? Ghostbusters. The escalation path is a predefined list of contacts for urgent issues like critical vulnerabilities or service outages. Now, this must be established before testing begins. Again, that SOW and rules of engagement better be 100% signed in place before we touch anything, because we're trying to keep our get-out-of-jail-free card free. All right, so we do need to sometimes go reprioritize. So pen tests are dynamic. sometimes you find something unexpected that kind of changes the mission itself. For instance, if we're testing a web app but find a flaw that exposes the entire network, we probably should stop and talk to our client. You might agree to shift the test focus on this new higher risk and reprioritize some of our goals. So, just because we like to say scope creep is a thing, sometimes we may have to figure out a way to reprioritize our goals and have a way to shift that on the fly. Now, when we're finally done, the final report is a roadmap to the client's vulnerabilities. It's probably one of the most dangerous reports that could ever get out to the public. So we never want to send it in a plain email. We want to use either an encrypted zip or a PDF or something like that. And we want to make sure that the passwords are sent via a different channel, like maybe the CEO's cell phone. We might want to send a text message. Why? Because if we do separate channels, the likelihood of them being intercepted is very slim to none. So we don't want to put the password in the same as the email file, because what was the point of encrypting it if you just put the password in the email file that you sent it in? Right? So we need to start thinking about this report on day one. We use quality control checklists to ensure that we meet all the formal requirements and have all of the evidence that we've collected. Now, there is a very specific way to format this report, which we'll talk at a later time. Because we want to begin with the end in mind. A finding without evidence is just an opinion. We need to make sure that we're keeping screenshots and logs constantly as we're going through the pen test. You don't want to have to rehack a system just so you can get a picture. Okay? You don't have evidence, it never happened. Now, the report itself is going to have two distinct sections for two very different types of people. The first section is going to be the executive summary. This is for the C-suites. We're going to focus on business risk and the bottom line. No technical jargon, please, okay? This is saying we found this risk, this is what could happen if it is exploited by an attacker. The technical findings, on the other hand, is going to focus on the CVEs, the code snippets, and the reproduction steps. And it's also going to help them with, guess what? Remediation. Because we need to tell them, well, this is how you fix it as well. Now, the screenshots themselves are going to help us capture the exploit in action. We're going to annotate them, draw circles and arrows for clarity. We may get some logs. This might include some raw output like ipconfig or who am I to prove the validity of what we've done. And then we also need to keep the steps in there so we can tell the client this is how you can replicate the finding themselves after we leave. So the reproducibility. Now, we do need to redact any personal identifiable information in our screenshots. We don't want to violate GDPR or even HIPAA, so PII or PHI data, right? Because we don't want to become a problem for one of the regulatory bodies. Because this report is probably going to be read by a lot of people who probably don't have permissions to see that information. We don't want to have a violation on our hands. So redact sensitive information. Now, we want to be unbiased. Don't exaggerate the risk to look cool. And don't downplay it to be nice either. So we do want to have an unbiased opinion and be very objective when we come with our solutions. And then our tone needs to be constructive. We are here to improve security, not shame the IT team. There's been so many times where I've read a Pentest report and it started off the sentence with, I don't know who did this, but, and they're really blaming somebody right off the bat, instead of saying, hey, we just found a vulnerability. We found that this file had a default configuration on it, and we want to make sure that it is changed to prevent it from happening in the future. Who cares who did it? So make sure you're not playing the blame game. And then, well, we need a peer review. We need to QC everything that we do. Never send a report without a second set of eyes. So make sure that we have technical accuracy. Check our grammar, check the formatting against the client's template. This is why it takes a team. Pen testing is not normally done by a single individual. It does take a team to make sure that the report and everything is a-okay. It's also another reason why they're a little bit on the expensive side. Now, AI is great for grammar checking and generating boilerplate text, right? But be very careful here because never paste clients' data into a public AI like ChatGPT. We're breaking confidentiality by doing that because the other thing is AI can hallucinate. You need to make sure that that is very accurate and that every technical detail it writes. It likes to assume. And so, as much as I love using AI to write things, be very, very careful using AI in your pen test reports, especially when it comes to the technical write ups. All right, so we've covered a billion things in this chapter, and I don't expect you to know this chapter by the back of your hand right away. It's going to take a couple reads. You might have to go through the chapter again. You may have to rewatch the video. You may want to use some of the AI tools and resources that I've provided you just to try to make sure that you truly understand these terms. This is some of the harder terms when it comes to pen tests because none of us really have experience with this because you have not been on the red team side. This is something that, if you were working red teaming for 3 to 5 years, you probably would know these terms and these models and probably a lot more than this. But to get going, please make sure that you review it again. So, well, that's the end of frameworks and reporting. So I'll see you for the next section.